It was the early morning of December 26, 1996, in Boulder, Colorado, when a case began that would later become one of the most confusing and heavily discussed criminal investigations in American history. Inside a large, wealthy home lived the Ramsey family, a family that from the outside appeared to have everything: success, comfort, and stability. But that morning, something happened inside that house that would turn their lives upside down forever and leave behind a mystery that has remained unsolved for decades. JonBenet Ramsey was a 6-year-old girl known for her beauty pageant appearances, her confident smile, and her cheerful personality. She had spent Christmas night with her family in what seemed like a normal, festive atmosphere. There were gifts, celebrations, and family moments that reflected a typical holiday experience. Nothing at that time suggested that within just a few hours, the entire household would become the center of a national tragedy in one of the most debated criminal cases in modern history. According to the family's statements, JonBenet had gone to sleep after returning home from Christmas celebrations. The house became quiet as the night went on, and each member of the family went to their respective rooms. Everything seemed normal, and there was no sign of danger or disturbance during those late hours. But somewhere in the early morning, something went terribly wrong inside that home, something that no one fully understood at the time, and something that would later become the subject of endless investigation and speculation. In the early hours of the morning, around 5:30 a.m., Patsy Ramsey woke up and came downstairs. What she found immediately created confusion, fear, and panic. On the staircase inside the house, she discovered a handwritten note. At first glance, it appeared to be a ransom note, but the contents quickly raised more questions than answers. The note claimed that JonBenet had been kidnapped and demanded money in exchange for her safe return. The amount demanded was $118,000, a figure that seemed oddly specific, and later became one of the most discussed details in the investigation. This number closely matched a bonus recently received by JonBenet's father, John Ramsey, which investigators later found unusual and potentially significant. However, at that moment, the family was not thinking about details or patterns. They were in shock, trying to understand whether their daughter had truly been taken. The ransom note itself stood out in a very unusual way. It was long, written over multiple pages, and contained language that felt dramatic and almost theatrical. Instead of being short and direct, as most ransom demands typically are, it included elaborate phrases and unusual wording that did not match the standard style of real kidnapping notes. This detail would later become one of the strongest points of debate among investigators and experts. Patsy Ramsey, overwhelmed by panic, immediately woke her husband. John Ramsey read the note, and within moments, the entire household shifted into chaos and fear. The police were contacted immediately, and officers arrived at the home within minutes. What they encountered was initially treated as a possible kidnapping situation, and the house quickly became an active investigation scene. However, even in the earliest stages, certain details did not fully align with a typical kidnapping scenario. One of the first concerns was the ransom note itself. Its length, tone, and placement inside the house raised immediate questions. Investigators wondered how a kidnapper could have entered the home, located materials, written such a long message, and left without being seen or interrupted, especially in a house where multiple people were present. As officers began securing the scene, another critical issue emerged. The home had not been properly isolated during the first moments of the investigation. Friends and family members were allowed to move freely inside the house, which later created serious concerns about contamination of evidence. In criminal investigations, especially in cases involving potential abduction or homicide, the first few hours are extremely important for preserving the integrity of the scene. In this case, that control was not fully maintained. Police began searching the house for any sign of forced entry or immediate evidence of an intruder. Doors and windows were examined, but there were no clear signs of break-in. This added another layer of confusion to the situation. If someone had entered from outside, how had they done so without leaving obvious physical evidence behind? And if no forced entry existed, then how did the kidnapping take place? As time passed, no communication came from any alleged kidnappers. The ransom note suggested urgency and specific instructions, but no follow-up call or message was ever received. This silence began to shift the direction of the investigation in a subtle but important way. What initially looked like a straightforward kidnapping was now becoming increasingly unclear, with several elements that did not fit together logically. Inside the home, the tension continued to rise. Officers expanded their search, moving through different rooms, but there was still no sign of JonBenet. The family was under extreme emotional distress, and investigators were trying to piece together a situation that was becoming more complicated with every passing hour. As the morning continued, the case began to develop into something far more uncertain than anyone had expected. The evidence available at that moment did not fully support a clear kidnapping narrative, but it also did not immediately explain what else might have happened. The situation was trapped between possibilities, with no solid direction yet confirmed. And as investigators continued their search inside the house, they were unaware that a discovery was about to be made that would completely change the nature of the investigation and transform this case from a possible kidnapping into one of the most shocking criminal mysteries in American history. As the morning continued in the Ramsey home, the atmosphere grew heavier with uncertainty. Police officers were still treating the situation as a possible kidnapping, but the longer they searched without finding any sign of JonBenet, the more doubts began to appear in the minds of the investigators. The ransom note remained the central piece of evidence, yet it also created more confusion the longer it was studied. One of the first things that stood out to detectives was the unusual nature of the note itself. It was not short or rushed, as most kidnapping demands typically are. Instead, it was lengthy, detailed, and written in a tone that felt almost staged or theatrical. Investigators began to question how an intruder could have spent so much time inside a busy household without being detected. The note also appeared to have been written using materials that may have come from inside the house, which added another layer of complexity to the situation. At the same time, officers carefully examined the home for any clear signs of forced entry. They checked doors, windows, and possible access points, but nothing indicated a break-in. There were no shattered locks, no broken glass, and no obvious damage that would suggest someone had entered the house from outside. This created a major contradiction in the early theory of kidnapping. If an intruder had not forced entry, then how had they gotten inside? As the investigation expanded, police also began to notice that the timeline of events inside the house was unclear. The family had been inside the home for hours before the discovery of the ransom note, yet no one reported hearing unusual sounds or disturbances during the night. This raised further questions about when exactly the incident had occurred and how it had gone unnoticed in a house where multiple people were present. Another important issue that soon became a concern was the handling of the crime scene. In the initial phase of the investigation, the home was not strictly secured. Friends of the family, relatives, and other individuals moved in and out of the house while the search was ongoing. This lack of control meant that potential evidence could have been unintentionally disturbed or contaminated. For forensic investigators, this would later become one of the most criticized aspects of the entire case. Meanwhile, tension inside the house continued to increase as the hours passed. Despite the ransom note suggesting that communication would follow, no phone call or message ever came from the supposed kidnappers. There was no negotiation, no update, and no indication that JonBenet would be returned. This silence began to shift the mindset of investigators, moving them away from a straightforward kidnapping assumption toward more uncertain possibilities. Evidence he was worried had been left behind, even after he had taken the bedsheets and blankets. This was a direct confession. While Lisa McBride had been in the ground for 5 years and her family was still living with unanswered questions, that information was not reported to the police. Years continued to pass. McCaffrey left New Jersey in 1996. He got married in 1997. He lived in South Carolina, then North Carolina. And the information about that 1995 conversation lay dormant in the memory of one person until the Sussex County Prosecutor's Office reopened the case in 2019 and investigators reviewed the entire file, re-entered people who might know anything and for the first time met the right person and asked the right questions for that information to be officially recorded. In 1997, Robert McCaffrey married Marjorie Gale Broom in Charleston, South Carolina. The man whose name Sussex County Police had known since 1990 was building a new life in another state. He lived in Charleston with Gale unsupervised and untracked. Then on March 18, 2012, Marjorie Gale McCaffrey disappeared from her home on Limestone Boulevard in Charleston with no signs of voluntary. Years from the morning they entered the lakeside house on Glen Road and found the cut telephone wires, the missing bedsheets, and Lisa not there. Through 4 months of searching, through every year without an arrest, without a trial, without any official answer, Sussex County Prosecutor Perez stated that he hopes the arrest brings closure to the family. Neighbor Ken Marsh, who lived in the Highland Lakes community through all those years, told the press it was terrible for the family. The family didn't have closure on it. But alongside the Lisa McBride case awaiting trial, there is a second question that remains unanswered and may never be answered. Marjorie Gale McCaffrey. McCaffrey's wife disappeared on March 18, 2012 from their home on Limestone Boulevard in Charleston, South Carolina. Her body has never been found, and as of March 17, 2026, the Charleston County Sheriff's Office is still appealing for information regarding that disappearance. McCaffrey is a suspect in Gale's disappearance, but has not been charged with no body and no evidence strong enough, representing the same gap between knowing and proving that Sussex County Police faced since 1990. How many women whose answers only McCaffrey knows? That question is one no trial will answer. Investigators are still searching for the items McCaffrey took on the night of June 23, 1990. Lisa's black wallet, her New Jersey driver's license, and the brass keychain engraved with the word Weezer, which investigators believe he kept as trophies. The extensive search of McCaffrey's home in North Carolina after his arrest turned up a laptop, 2 black axes in his car, and 3 firearms, but did not find the wallet, driver's license, or the brass keychain. If those items still exist after 36 years, they would be physical evidence connecting McCaffrey directly to the house on Glen Road in a way that even DNA cannot do. The Lisa Marie McBride case leaves 3 practical lessons that any American can apply. The first lesson is about home safety in the most specific sense. McCaffrey did not break down the front door. He cut the telephone wires outside the house, slit the rear window screen, and stood waiting in the dark before Lisa returned. In 2026, with mobile phones and inexpensive security camera systems, those preparatory steps would be much more difficult. But the principle remains valid. If you live alone, check whether the windows at the back of your house have cameras. Make sure someone knows what time you are getting home, and remember that. Attackers often prepare from the outside before the victim steps inside the house. The second lesson is about confessions and community responsibility. In 1995, McCaffrey told an acquaintance that he had killed Lisa because she refused to go on a date. That person knew, and that story laid dormant for 24 years before investigators found the right person and asked the right question. If you hear someone confess to something serious, whether they say it as if telling a story or as if telling a story or as if bragging, that information might be the only thing standing between justice and a family's waiting. Reporting to law enforcement is not about passing judgment. It is giving the system its chance to work. The third lesson is about DNA databases. McCaffrey's DNA profile only entered Couds because he was convicted of obstructing an investigation in 2014 in a completely different case. That system works, but only when states and localities fully submit profiles. As a voter, you have the right to ask your elected representatives whether your state is fully submitting DNA profiles into CODIS in accordance with current laws. If Lisa's story touched you, please hit subscribe so you don't miss future cases. Thank you for your companionship, and we will see each other in the next. Today, the JonBenet Ramsey case remains officially unsolved. It continues to be studied, discussed, and re-examined by investigators, journalists, forensic experts, and true crime researchers around the world. Every few years, a new documentary, a new book, or a new forensic review brings fresh attention to the mystery. And with every new examination, the same evidence is viewed from a different angle. Some experts continue to focus on the unidentified DNA, believing that advances in forensic science may eventually reveal the identity of the person connected to it. Others remain convinced that important answers may still be hidden within the original evidence collected from the Ramsey home. The challenge is that after so many years, separating fact from theory has become increasingly difficult. As technology continues to improve, investigators have not completely abandoned hope. Modern DNA techniques have already solved numerous cold cases that once seemed impossible to crack. Cases that sat dormant for decades have suddenly produced suspects, arrests, and long-awaited answers. Because of this, many people believe that the JonBenet Ramsey investigation could one day experience a similar breakthrough. The question is no longer whether technology can help solve old crimes. The question is whether enough reliable evidence remains to finally reveal the truth. And that is exactly where the mystery stands today. Nearly 3 decades have passed since that December morning in Boulder, Colorado. The evidence has been analyzed countless times. The theories have been debated endlessly. The suspects have come and gone, yet the most important answers remain missing. Who entered that house? What exactly happened during those overnight hours? And why did a 6-year-old girl become the center of one of the most controversial criminal investigations in American history? For now, those questions remain unanswered. But the story of JonBenet Ramsey was far from over, because in the years that followed, new forensic developments, renewed investigations, and continuing public interest would keep bringing this case back into the spotlight, ensuring that the search for answers never truly came to an end.